left unsaid. Days that can't be counted by the time till rent. Tomorrow's just another like the one that comes next. The corner of the highway that leads to the job at the desk by the boss with the elegant watch. The tick of the clock and the tick of the clock mark the moments till the ticking stops.
Erik LeDrew, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
So many of the training programs, these sort of bespoke training programs that we start at Second City, happen because certain populations find their way to taking classes at Second City, and we only find out later that like they're all like some psychiatrist had people come here for group to deal with their social anxiety. So we started an improv for social anxiety program. Some years ago.
Amazing.
Yeah, some years ago, we found a bunch of veterans were here. So we started doing a veteran program.
Oh, my God.
So I'm curious hearing that, because you're in the arts like I am.
Yeah.
How much of that experience did inform you going into this field or the way you exist inside the field?
Just to be clear, you mean my combat experience, the military? Yeah, I mean, honestly, it kind of made it a fait accompli, you know, like it's kind of hard to, once you do something like join the U.S. military, and specifically I was a combat photojournalist in the U.S. military. Those weren't actually separate. That may not have been clear from my bio, but, you know, I enlisted, and then, you know, I got a certain whatever number on the test scores, and they were like, you know, you might be wasted on the infantry. No disrespect to the infantry. I spent my whole time enlisted wishing I was in the infantry, but you know, they offered me a list, and I was like, I would much rather like write and take photos, you know, than you know, be a grease monkey or something like that. So, you know, once you do that and then get out and then go to college and try to find your way in the world, it's almost like it just, you know, just follows you everywhere you go. So there's no doubt that it led me to this moment, you know, in every way. And actually, I have a story I'll tell you later that is directly related to that. So we can come back to it.
All right. So I didn't realize you were a photojournalist in the Army. And what immediately I thought of was some years ago, we were looking to shake up the photography of Second City because in an improvised art form, anything can happen. And the photos were very staid. And we ended up hiring this guy, Todd Rosenberg, who's become a friend. He does all the photos for the Green Bay Packers.
Oh, amazing.
You're right. So you can imagine, right, that chaos that he's trying to capture, and they're beautiful. His shots are beautiful every week, and especially with what, you know, the last couple of weeks for the Bears, unbelievable. And he brought that spirit to shooting, you know, these theater artists. And I know they're worlds apart, but you get what I'm talking about.
100%. I mean, it's kinetic, you know, like movement in space, real time, you know, every heartbeat changes, you know, what follows. Right. So you know, without trying to hit it too on the nose, like when I transitioned from sort of like being a generic, you know, the role is called story producer in the kind of like docu-reality world. It's writing. I don't appreciate being called a producer. In fact, I resent it. But you know, no disrespect to producers, they're essential. That's not what I do. You know, I architect narrative to not sound too pretentious, or maybe way too pretentious. But you know, like it's when I transitioned to, you know, I got some work copywriting, as my sort of like bio probably mentioned, and you know, landed these kind of like Nike spots, and immediately, you know, it just felt like working on an action film, honestly, you know, not too reductive about it. And it was just, you know, incredibly, just kinetic. That was the operative word, you know, and it felt just like getting to kind of almost like someone giving you all the raw footage of like I don't know, pick your favorite action film director, you know, and you just get to mix and match and figure out like, you know, what you get to do, you know, with that. Or if you've shot it yourself, you know, obviously you're, you know, able to craft something a little bit more dynamically within the frame, and then, you know, piece it together as well on documentary side, especially like unlike, you know, your collaborator who shoots for the Packers. You know, he's like capturing the images. That's another level from a lot of what is done in the, especially the sports part of the documentary world, where you're often, you know, working with like leagues and organizations who have their own internal people, you know, who probably employ, you know, your colleague. And so oftentimes you're collaborating sort of like with them very lightly and respectfully because they do this every day, and this like the volume of reps that they have, like there's no possible way, no matter what your story chops might be, that you can sort of match their ability to capture something as kinetic and alive as sports, or in your case, improv.
So this is interesting because it's my perfect follow up because my wife Ann runs a comedy major, right? So she at Columbia College here in Chicago, and she does what she calls comedy cross training. So they learn to do stand up, they learn improv, they write, they have to do, they put up an original show, so they produce. So because as you know, in the industry, it was kind of always this way, but is absolutely this way now. You don't know where you're going to end up. You have an
Hmm.
idea of a thing you want to do, and I look at your credits and I'm like, oh, you've kind of done it all. And so I'm wondering how you see that come together. Is it like Legos, or is it completely disparate?
By that you mean like just sort of the path that's led me here, the credits that represents. Yeah. No, it's like breadcrumbs, I for
Yeah.
I mean, I think this is probably, very much probably in the spirit of what you preach, but like for was humbled very early getting out of college, thinking like, okay, I'm a combat veteran, and I like, whatever, got 2 degrees in X amount of years, and wow, I'm just king of the world. And then, the real world just really did not give a shit. And, it was very humbling for me. I was fortunate, I think, to be humbled, that early in life. But, of course, I have to continue to relearn that every day. But once I kind of spent a deal of time, struggling. I mean, it was hard for me to get a job as like a security guard out of college. You know what I mean? It was kind of like the depths of the recession after 2008. So this was like
Mhm.
2010. And it was just like a horrible time in the job market. And so I mean, it was hard for me to get work of any kind, let alone in what I studied, filmmaking. And then the first, sort of gig that was tangentially related to it that I got, it was like, required a degree of like mental flexibility. And I had to sort of just like adopt by necessity, a sort of like go through the door that opens mentality, and
Mhm.
as long as that door is moving me sort of like one step closer or pointed in the direction that I hope I am going, then that's good enough, and and I guess, and it's not like there haven't been setbacks, or I haven't sort of like raged against the machine of life, but yeah, I mean, if you had told me even 7 years ago that I would be on a Second City podcast, talking about an Alex versus Arod documentary that I made for HBO, like, I would tell you you're out of your mind, so
Well,
this was
that
not planned by any means.
yeah, and I mean, I think that's good news in some senses. So for Second City's 65th anniversary, I gathered together sort of all those. We have a creative depth group that meets every week, and it's basically all the people who are left from the old days and some of the new creative leaders. And so, my first question for everyone, which ended up being the entire podcast, like all we did was what was your route to Second City?
Hmm.
Every single person either got fired or quit Second City at some point.
Oh man.
Everyone was it was so talk about breadcrumbs. It was like, but it was great by
Yeah.
the end, and people who listened to it were like, well, okay, if that's what it's going to be like. So what was the best foot in the door you got, like where suddenly you maybe were putting yourself in a position to get on a Second City podcast talking about Alex versus Arod, which I want to talk to you about next.
Sure, yeah, we'll get to that. Oh gosh, let me think. The first thing that comes to mind were those Nike spots, honestly, and not because they were Nike spots. It actually, but what led me to that. So I had a period of time, like I said, of humbling unemployment. Period of time of kind of like middle. I was a engineer for Microsoft for like two and a
Mhm.
half years. Like writing code. Like, I don't know how to program. Like, but it was like, well, it has video in the title, so I'll do it.
Yep.
And and actually, I hadn't really been. I mean, I didn't grow up really watching much television. I was, fortunate maybe to grow up in a household where like I was supposed to read if I wanted to be entertained. That was probably the
Mhm.
best thing my parents did for me. I watched a lot of movies. I was a movie junkie, but I didn't really watch television. So I hadn't watched a lot of like reality TV, despite my sort of like combat photojournalism background. I wasn't really versed in unscripted, quote unquote, as it's called, in the industry. And at Microsoft, I was exposed to a ton of like, we're working on just like massive volumes of content at the time, kind of later turned out to be training my replacement algorithm, but like at the time, like just crunching a high volume of video, and there's no more, voluminous, video than throwaway junk food reality TV, and so that sort of turned into that. I left, I was fired by Microsoft or laid off, I guess. Technically, I didn't do anything wrong, but just, I trained my replacement well, I guess. And the algorithm took over even back then. And that I was able to just kind of almost like fake my way into getting a reality TV gig because I just thought like it was sort of low hanging fruit, and there was a job posting that I felt that I was probably not technically qualified for, but there's no way I couldn't do, um, and turned out I was totally right about that. But the preface to that is that was terrible. Working in reality TV, it was awful, and just not suited to my temperament or tastes in any way. And so I quit that. I did not get laid off or fired. I quit, and I just said at that point, so that's all preamble to answer your question, which is to say, at that point, I said like I'm a writer. I'm not a producer. I'm not a story producer. I'm a writer. And I'm just going to say that I'm a writer with a capital W. I'm going to plant my flag on it, and I'm going to die on that hill. And, I took it as deadly serious as I possibly could. I've always been a good writer. But that sort of like summer of fun employment, I just dedicated myself to, not just writing every day, but like to granularly working on my craft to just like, I would, worked my way through like all of the classical, like prose stylistic books, elements of style. I like read one page, and then I would spend the whole day working on, short story or a screenplay, just working on like where to put a semicolon properly or something like that. And I did that for months, and at the end of that sort of stretch, I worked my way through a couple of, I think, the philosophy of style, which was like the antecedent to the elements of style. I think there was another style book that came after that that was a little bit more modern. So it was like three like heavy grammar prose type books, not sort of like generic how-to books, but like really granular. And so, after those couple of months, I just felt completely, I was already a very confident writer before that, and after that, I mean, when you, by the way, just to tie that back into my combat photojournalist, when
Yeah.
you have to file a story on a deadline, even at 19 years old, when you don't really know, you do know how to like string a couple words together in the English language, and there's like a freaking, high Kiowa attack helicopter like dropping hellfire bombs like outside the base that you're at, and you're watching it happen out the window while you're writing on your like old Dell laptop, that keeps dying. Like, you don't get intimidated by writing much of anything after that, And
Yeah.
so flash forward, this is like, 10, 11 years after that, when I sort of like got quit reality TV with a capital Q, quit, and planted my flag, and just like really, it was almost like a process of convincing myself that there was like nothing I couldn't write. It wasn't like I wasn't a good writer, but I was just going back to the fundamentals, gonna like just work on all the basics. That way, like, there's no doubt in my mind, that like I can handle whatever. And off of that, I got a copywriting job. Again, kind of, I would say like lied my way into it. I technically worked on, a reality show that was like branded by Mountain Dew. I think you mentioned in my bio. And, I said I had like copywriting experience with brands, and that wasn't true. It was basically true. I had worked with brands and I had done writing. I hadn't done copywriting, but
Yeah.
that was the thing that like really launched me on this path. Once I sort of made that decision and kind of went back into the incubator and, sort of like took my medicine, I would say this is I don't know if it's the end of the path, but this is where the path has led to directly from that moment. And if I had not sort of quit with a capital Q and committed to like humbling myself in the face of already thinking I was a pretty good writer, I definitely wouldn't, have made it here. I don't know where I would be. I mean, hopefully I'd be somewhere and happy, but probably definitely not here.
Yeah. I think that's the thing I learned very late in my career was that everything that I went through in my life informed in some part the thing I'm doing. And I was thinking the discipline that you get in, an army situation absolutely is an excellent preparation for the discipline you need to write, because writing is hard. I have written a book. It was torture. It took 2 years. It was the worst. And I love to, and I actually do love to write, but when you have to then sort of write in that. And so I'm curious too where sports figures in, because you've
Mhm.
done that feels like a milieu that you're living in. You always been a sports guy?
No,
No.
actually, now I am quite a quite
Yeah.
a football fan. Specifically, the Seahawks. R.I.P. Bears.
Yeah.
That was a
Yeah.
fantastic game. I
Great.
love the
Great game.
cinematic quality of it. I just, man, I live in Los Angeles and we don't have seasons here. I'm not from here. From Seattle. Grew up in the rain and clouds, so I watch almost football this time of year to like live vicariously and experience the
Yeah.
weather. I'm sure, y'all are like, I don't know about that. I'd rather be in LA, but the grass is always greener on the other side of that equation, I guess. But,
Well, I was at that game. It was
oh
gorgeous.
my
And
gosh, really? You don't
yeah.
have frostbite? That's unbelievable. Like,
No, let's be honest. I was in a suite. I wasn't sitting outside, but it was so, like, of course we're like, I think they've lost, but we've been in this situation before. And then Caleb tosses that thing, and you're just like, oh my god, the cinematic is
unbelievable.
it. It was
Yeah.
unbelievable, and the place, and the two things, the electricity that happened in that arena at that moment only equaled the deafening silence when they lost, when the
Yeah,
field goal got hit.
I know that. I know that feeling. I mean, honestly, like you guys kind of experienced it in the same game, but the 2014 NFC Championship. I hope I'm not jinxing the Seahawks this weekend. Knock on
Yeah,
tabletop here, but like
yeah,
taking on the Packers down the whole game. Somehow the miraculous like Hail Mary in overtime gets caught. They're going to the first back-to-back Super Bowl since like the Patriots did it in 03, 04, whatever. At 1 yard line, best running back, one of the best in history. We're gonna throw it. Like, what?
I know,
Oh
I
my
know.
god! So I know those feelings. I didn't have to experience them in the exact same game though. So my heart does go out to you guys. I was rooting for you.
All right, let's talk about Alex versus Arod, because
Sure.
I'm a Cubs fan. I of course knew who Alex Rodriguez was, of course, but I didn't know the full story. And I guess the biggest thing is, like, it's so honest.
Mhm.
And how did you know that he was going to be willing to be up for that? Did you have to do prep work? How did you even enter that
Yeah.
experience?
I mean, well, there's maybe two parts there that I could, if I could, be a bit of a writer and like structure it just my answer just a little bit prematurely. But, I entered it by just his name being brought to me at the company Religion of Sports that produced it. I've worked with the owner of the company quite a bit over the last, 7, 8 years. That's Gotham Chopra. He co-directed Man in the Arena with me. Also Russell Westbrook documentary I directed, and he just floated the name as someone who was interested in had a story to tell, and so I just thought about it, and I don't know if it was an immediate yes, but it was like almost an immediate like this is
Hmm.
there's something here. Anyways, I felt so that was and then there's like a long period of development that followed, punctuated by short bursts of anxiety when pitching or having to, rebuild a pitch deck or treatment overnight because someone doesn't, I don't know, something in it, but a very long drawn out sort of incubatory time. And, you know, I would say certainly to answer your question about the honesty in particular, that was that was a prerequisite.
Yeah.
That was what was intriguing, about him was that he had a bit of a reputation as I'll call an unreliable narrator. I'll use the literary term because I think that's certainly from my point of view, that's how we approached it. And, that opens up a whole the terrific thing about that is, as a storyteller, that opens up a whole suite of devices that have been thoroughly vetted by brilliant, storytellers for over a century about how to deal with the unreliable narrator as your point of view, and what you can do, sort of within the world of storytelling to sculpt that and ensure that that's like a part of the story that you own. So we both knew like that the audience would perceive him as an unreliable narrator, and that was like a part of the challenge that intrigued us. And on the other hand, we had to, we had to be get aligned, I guess is the word, like just like honestly constant alignment with just like, are we making the same movie? Do we have the same objective here? And it was the operative words were, like honesty, authenticity. um the sort of term du jour is raw, and they use that a lot. Personally, I don't know how to activate that. I can work with authenticity. I can work with like, protecting the integrity of a piece or of a voice. I can, it's not as actionable to say something's raw. I mean, what, you just like shoot it handheld. I guess it feels raw, and, but maybe that was helpful for him, because that was a word that came up a lot that we talked about. And it was just sort of like setting that kind of like constellation of, you know, not any one North Star, but a constellation of stars that we're gonna like be headed in that direction, and if any of us feel like we're veering off course, like let's touch home base, to mix metaphors. Let's check in and get realigned. And if we're not aligned anymore, if we say it out loud and we're no longer on the same page, then that's a different discussion that we should have right away. And that happened throughout. That was the process. That was the process in the macro. I would say it was, we were all aligned on where we're at, and then just constantly returning to that throughout, and it's easier said than done, but it's also as simple as it sounds. You know what I mean? Like, you don't have to do much more than that, but you have to do it. And it is really hard sometimes to do that, you know?
Yeah. Well, I'm curious too what the chicken and egg is on the title,
Yeah.
because the man, you know how hard it is to get a good title. And
Yeah.
Alex versus Arod as a title, and related to that moment where you ask, am I talking to Alex or I'm talking to Arod,
Yeah.
is so beautiful, and it points to the
Oh,
problem,
thanks.
because he's both,
Yeah.
like all of us. There, we
Thank
we
you.
have many selves, and I love that complexity is really sort of it's treated tenderly. Like, you can have great compassion for this guy and also know he's a rich guy who lied at a certain point, and like, okay, so that's it. But he seems like, it looks like his kids love him, and it seems like he's trying to find some self-actualization in his life at this point.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And with respect to the title, I mean, we just called it A-Rod for the longest time. I
Mhm.
personally, do love like those like clean, iconic titles, where it's like very singular, monosyllabic almost,
Yeah.
especially if you have that gifted in the form of a nickname, right? A moniker. Um, but at some point, we realized that we had been talking about the sort of thematic thread that runs through the series. We, we just kept calling it like the Alex versus A-Rod thread, and we just like colloquially in conversations, and it just kept coming up and coming up and coming up. And honestly, like HBO, to their credit, at a certain point in the process, it was time to like sort of formally, baptize the work. And they were like, we all love A-Rod. Are there any other options? We've talked about Alex versus A-Rod a lot. Like, is that a title you guys would consider? And once that was kind of like spoken into being by give our executive credit, Bentley Weiner. She's fantastic. And her supervising producer, Abtine Motia. I mean, those guys earned the credibility that HBO has is well earned. And I experienced it firsthand. And that was really sort of from them just opening the conversation, and I'd never really there's always a title conversation, of course, and sometimes it's you just like live with a working title, and then you run into a wall and reality sets in that you have to like, well, it's got to have the subject's name in it, right? So that it's searchable, and I understand their realities to that, but they're rarely like make for good titles, and I felt like in this case, I mean, A-Rod is A-Rod. Like, what do you need to do, But to be honest, like when we started thinking about it and HBO opened that conversation, it was fairly late in the process. Probably around the time we locked one or two episodes, and we're in the process of locking the third. and setting, sort of everything that follows from locking your edit. And that conversation became, it happened in earnest. And honestly, it didn't take much time. It was just, I think, frankly, they made a strong case for having a title that was a bit more thematically pointed than something as broad as Arod. And in retrospect, I mean, I should say at the time, I didn't disagree with them at all. I completely agreed. But in retrospect, maybe now I'm only realizing like how much that, they were sort of like on the money in terms of,
Mm-hmm.
not like having a more thematically pointed title. That's something we never. There were cuts, especially because there were cuts where that was a bit more of an overt conversation at times, and just by necessity, virtue of, I mean, we had like the first episode's the shortest episode, and it's like 54 minutes or something like that. It was over 2 hours at one point. So
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, there's a lot of material we had to cut, not to get down to time, but to just tell the best story. You've written a book, you know better than I do. Like writing is not just rewriting; it's editing. It is
Mm-hmm.
revision. It is what you leave out. What is. I have a little like reminder here. Don't break the silence. I mean, the blank spaces, the negative space is almost as important as the occupied space or the loud thing. And in this case, I felt like the benefit of having that title was that it it was a little bit of a pointer towards something we weren't able to as explicitly talk about. Maybe honestly better for not being as explicit about it as we originally had designed. And so now it's a bit like you set that framework for people. My hope anyway is that's the framework in which people, like, you're priming the viewer to approach
Yeah.
it that way, right? And then and then it's a light touch, and honestly, like at that point, once we did decide on that title, there was a point at which we did like another pass and kind of like lightened up a little bit to try
Mm,
and just like not hit everybody over the head with the theme quite so much, to let
sure,
it be
sure.
obviously at times, but like my question to him that you referenced, it was meant to be a joke in the interview setup. I didn't know he'd use it, I was just playing with him, but
Mm-hmm.
obviously it works, and it kind of alludes to a little bit of like, the tone as well as the theme of where we might go. But it's I was very happy that we didn't have to kind of be as explicit with some of those, some of the interiority that is better, I think, when you just kind of experience it through watching a real person in time and space live through emotions and memories rather than having them sort of narrate it, if that makes sense. And the title does a lot of that, like, sort of preparatory work, I think. I hope.
Yeah, and I think this is misunderstood by the general public and for those of us who create art, is how much it does evolve over a period of time, and that you have to be so conscious of, okay, now that we have this title, it's got to pay off, but if we
Hmm.
hammer too much on the nose, it's going to like be boring. And then also like, and I don't know why we have such violent terms, but we call it killing your babies when it's like
Yeah.
something so great and it just
Because
doesn't
it
work with
hurts.
the text.
Because it
Yes.
hurts. It's really hard. That is, from the outside looking in, definitely sounds a bit rich. But when you have to do it, it feels like you're murdering something. Definitely.
Yeah.
There's a lot of dead babies. I'm sorry, maybe. I'm sorry. There's a lot of casualties, creative casualties on the floor of our editing room for sure.
One of the things, this is one of my favorite stories from my days producing at Second City, was it was a show with Colbert and others, but there was a scene called Spelling Bee that got very early, and it killed. It was like closing out the first act, and it was these like sadistic embodied voices torturing these kids in a spelling bee. And what we ended up doing was actually taking it out of the show for like 3-4 weeks during the preview process, not to burn it. We're like, we do not want to lose this. We're going to take it out. We're going to make sure everything else works. We're going to put it back in. And if it works, and it did. And because I've made the mistake the other way, where it's like the best scene suddenly
Mhm.
doesn't work. So there's all sorts of games. All right,
Can I ask you? I
yeah.
mean, just that's such an interesting example like that. Like, are you don't want to burn it? Are you saving the performers from burning it, or from it just
Yes.
kind of like getting out into the popular consciousness burning?
No,
Like, how do you
saving.
mean?
We're saving the performers from becoming rote with a piece that always kills, because
Yeah.
if it peaks too early,
Oof.
I've just done this for 30 years, right? Or, longer, 38 years. That if it peaks too early, I'm going to tell you it's 12 weeks into this process, and that's how long Second City takes to create shows.
Hmm.
It probably won't work. So let's save it. If it's that good, it will. And and there's other things that directors do as little tricks. Mick Napier, who's a director I've worked with a bunch, if he has a bunch of like 2-person scenes, it's like, I can't load up this show with a bunch of 2-person scenes. What if I somehow put them all in the same scene? Is there a world in which these people exist? So suddenly there's 6 people on stage. Yes, they're in 3 different conversations, but you're seeing them simultaneously, and then you're like, oh, that changes the whole thing. So you almost have to, you have to dissect like a psychologist, like a magician, rabbi, all the different elements when you're directing, especially original, right?
Right. That's amazing. I mean, I hear you, describe that. And that's just like another, to me, as confident as I am maybe in talking about writing, that's another level of like, I can perceive it, but like, man, like I know exactly what you're talking about, that feeling of like burn. And I've directed, scripted stuff, more short films, and sort of scripted commercials. But so, I haven't really experienced it on quite the stage or canvas you're talking about, but in documentary, also in interviews, like, most of the interviews in Alex versus Arod, there were a lot, but most of them were done pretty early on. In part, I mean, there's other reasons for it, but the main reason is because you just can't, especially when it's not something that, is a script where someone, you're expecting, albeit professionals, albeit, but people to embody, inhabit these characters, learn their lines, learn their blocking, play, right? Create business, whatever, like when it's someone sitting in a chair, the beauty of that, and it also has a lot of downfalls, but the beauty of it is like there is nothing that will save you if their storytelling sucks.
Yeah.
And so you don't get a lot of bites at the apple. It very much is like first take, best take, like there's not really a take 2 in documentaries. Sometimes you do pick up interviews, and people have watched the show. They'll probably be able to spot them, unfortunately, despite our best efforts. But maybe that's I do have a personal thesis that, the making of a film, especially a documentary, is a part of the story of the documentary. And, that you don't actually want to disguise the seams a little too much. But I won't digress, too much on that. But in listening to that is like another, what you're describing is just like, to me, that is where I start to get like a little like intimidated with like my capability. I hear that and I'm like, man, I wish I was good at that. That's why I asked you that question.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's, we're known for developing young talent, right? So it's all part of the training process. And the reason so many famous people come out of Second City is the improv training applied in this professional capacity in front of sold out commercial houses. We're commercial theater. We've got to sell tickets. And, you do 8 shows a week for probably like a year and a half, 2 years.
Mhm.
You almost by default get good, just because you have so many, swings at it.
The reps. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that, that you're like, oh, of course, you put this person in a writer's room or on a set or whatever, and they've been thrown so much stuff over their time here, whether it's like weirdo audience members roaming on stage, or Paul Simon shows up and does the improv set by playing songs, and you have to improvise based on him just doing Sound of Silence. That happened.
Oh my God.
I mean, it's like so you learn to run with it. And it's funny because the whole reason you and I are talking is our mutual friend Lindsay Shookus.
Yes.
And let's give her props, because
We should. Absolutely.
I know Lindsay because she was kind of like me at Saturday Night Live. I've always been I kind of ran the joint, but I had a boss, Andrew Alexander. She had a boss, Lauren Michaels, but she did a lot of the running at Saturday Night Live. And then she was a producer on this, right?
Correct. Yeah, she was. There's several executive producers, but she was the one I worked with the most. I mean, to be perfectly blunt, by a lot. She was. She was on virtually every shoot. I talked to her pretty much every day, if not multiple times a day. I mean, for me, just speaking from my experience, and I don't know exactly what she did at SNL. I've heard the stories, but obviously I wasn't there. but having worked with her only in this capacity, it was like she was like a creative therapist for me.
Yes, yeah,
But
yes,
what that
yes.
wound up being, she came to the project, with Alex, and there's a story we could tell there if you're interested in hearing about it. But
Yeah,
it might be more her story to tell. But I guess what I can say is that they knew each other from a time in which he was going to host SNL. And then I believe there was a strike. I don't know if it was the writers' strike or the
that's right.
actors,
That's right.
but one of the strikes shut it down and they were never able to rebook him, but they stayed in touch. And fortunately for us, like that turned into, a genuine friendship over the years. And when he, if you've seen any of the publicity he did for the show when it was premiering back in November, he like it was almost annoying to me because I've heard it so much, but it's also very real. He was like every interview he was doing, he was talking about how like nervous he was with it coming out, and that it's a little traumatizing and triggering. And I was, of course, like I heard that for 3 years,
Hmm.
but it was probably like novel and quite bold of him to say that. But and that's all true. And the reason he was able to, I think, I mean, not to take any credit away from him. Ultimately, it's his life and his story and his storytelling, that powers the piece. But Lindsay really was the, armature propping him up, or I think she was a bit of a, almost maybe personal therapist or performance therapist, if you like, for him, performance coach, and that was a part of it. He's like so used to being coached, and
Yeah.
many of these athletes are. And so if you can kind of adopt that mindset working in the sports venue, a sports milieu, like, and especially in my role, like, think of it more like coaching rather than collaboration, even if it is ultimately collaborative. It's just a bit of a different hat you put on. And she was, she was very much like a sort of personal coach to him. And then, ended up becoming very, helpful to me as the sort of ups and downs of the project began to unfold. And it was just very difficult subject matter for him, and that infused the project. And my hope is that we sailed those seas ably. No, we didn't capsize, and made it to port, in one piece, and hopefully delivered something, that's got real substance. And and for me, that I mentioned that constellation of North Stars earlier, being aligned with your subject, and the other sort of by the way, it wasn't just Alex, that was with HBO, that was with the company Religion of Sports, that was Gotham and I, that was my sort of key creative collaborators were Lindsay, and then the other one I should mention is Kevin Barth. He's my credited co-writer. He's the lead editor on the project and was on it almost as long as I was. Just that the sort of that trio of people, we were all just kind of like in it together,
Hmm.
and they really, if Lindsay was kind of like the bit of the, like I said, therapist for Alex, a bit of a therapist for me, just helping to figure out like what are the issues, what are we hung up on, like how do we get there, and to be honest, you should be talking to her. I don't know why you're talking to me.
I had her on the
Yeah.
podcast. She's been
Okay,
on.
great, good. Everyone should go listen to that.
Yeah, no, I mean, see, this is this is the weird thing about our respective industries, and I've done a little work in TV and film, but mostly theater. Is you're working with massive egos, but to make things successful, everyone has to supplement those egos and become an
Yeah,
ensemble. And it
yeah,
happens. It happens more than you would think it would happen, and it is people like Lindsay, who's a born connector, who's reflexively kind, that where you're like, oh, okay, I don't want to embarrass myself in front of her. She's cool,
right.
I mean,
Yeah,
and so it's stuff like that. Okay, before I'm going to ask you in a second for your yes and story, but I
sure.
have a couple questions before we do that. um, I want to know the documentarians who inspired you.
Hmm.
And for me, I thought of three for myself. Steve James, for sure. Hoop
Mm-hmm.
Dreams, Interrupters, A Compassionate
Yeah, yeah,
Spy.
no doubt.
Errol Morris, Thin Blue Line, Fog of War,
Of
and then
course.
Ken Burns. I mean, just like the OG of all this stuff. Uh,
Yeah, yeah.
who is there other people who you really love?
I mean, the two that were like, yeah, absolute North Stars for me. I mean, Errol Morris, was a number one. I mean, Fog of War, I watched. I didn't mean to make this like a veterans like therapeutic podcast, by the
Mhm.
way, but I watched that like right before I deployed to Iraq, and
Wow.
I mean, it probably was the thing I needed to see because at the time, I mean, this is obviously a whole can of worms, and I don't mean anything political by this. I was 19 years old and had no idea what was going on in the world, and I enlisted pre 9/11, so I didn't really
Yeah.
sign up for this. Was my mindset at the time, but I was in a personally like in a tough place and very dissatisfied with it's why I joined the army to kind of like try and break out of childhood patterns and when I sat down and watched The Fog of War, I sat down excited, if it doesn't sound sad, excited to like go to war. And I
Mhm.
left thinking like, this is not what I thought I was, and I don't know what I'm about to get into now,
Yeah.
and obviously that's not a combat documentary the way Ken Burns is like Vietnam is, or the war even, his Great World War II documentary, or any number of other incredible, documentaries about recent conflicts. But just the way it just showed me something about the nature of war, the nature of mechanized war, the nature of war in the 20th century, American warfare, all that, that like I was kind of in a military that was in the shadow of that. And it showed me how what I was becoming a part of like came into being, and sort of what the architect of that is, what he thought at the time, how that came at their decision, that like they were just people, right? Like making decisions, you know,
Mhm.
and so it really kind of like blew my mind. And that's all to say, none of that would have mattered if it wasn't just like a riveting story. Like it's a great film, and so that both impacted me personally, but it also just showed me like the cinematic potential of the medium, if you will indulge that phrase.
Yep.
But just that it could be a dude sitting in a chair, and if you have if it's well shot and an interviewer asks compelling, thoughtful questions, and Philip Glass writes your score, you can have an incredible,
Sure.
piece of
Yeah.
film that is
Yeah.
also resonant beyond just what it makes you think and feel. And so that is the Fog of War for me is like very much like a sort of like inciting incident in this documentary journey. I hadn't seen it since theaters, and I revisited at the start of this project, in part because I watched the other Errol Morris doc that really was influential on this, and probably more directly influential was the Pigeon Tunnel, the one he did about John le Carre, the fantastic author.
Yep.
I actually just read Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy a couple months ago, like one of the best books I've ever read, and I can't
Great
believe
book.
I'd never.
Yeah.
Incredible. And that's and again, like the stakes are in, I mean, I don't want to say the stakes are lower, the stakes are like incredible in that, but again, just like it just showed me like, okay, you don't have to do anything special. And it was a nice reminder because at the time we were pitching Arod, there was a lot of like, like Mid Journey was becoming a thing. If anyone's seen Man in the Arena, there's a lot of visual effects in that. And at the time, documentary, I think, as a form, was headed in this much more kind of like, frankly, artificial direction.
Mhm.
And that was fine for the time. I was riding that wave and enjoying it, and enjoyed making action movies and playing with visual effects. And but when I saw Pigeon Tunnel and then revisited The Fog of War, and kind of like looked at our pitch and sort of like some of these goofy, I shouldn't say goofy, because our graphic designer who helped us develop our pitch deck is brilliant, but just like almost like trying too hard,
Yeah.
to like impress. And it's like, we have a great subject, and the intention is right. We're all aligned on what we want to do and the story we want to tell. And it's a very compelling, like, just if it's let it live and die on how good of a story it is, and like just relax. And so because of revisiting those two Errol Morris movies, I threw out like a lot of things that we thought we might play, what we thought we might film, like scripted recreations and
Mhm.
staged scenes of things, but have him act in them. And it's like kind of stuff that could be really fun in the abstract, but when you really think about it, and like you don't need it. And documentary, I think, is best served when you just like stick to things. That's the fundamental promise of documentary, right? It's the opposite of theater or film. The fundamental promise of theater and film is make believe, right? The
Yep.
fundamental promise of documentary is it's real. And
Hmm.
so I just felt like that was a reminder to get back to that. And that was like, again, my sort of personal North Star for the project. Ken Burns is the other guy who comes to mind, the other documentary filmmaker. I will admit, I actually haven't seen Hoop Dreams. I
Oh wow.
am ashamed. I just it's like 3 hours long. I'm just like, and I've watched plenty of 3 hour movies. It's not like, but it's just like, anytime I like cue it up, like on a, whatever Criterion channel or whatever happens to be on, and I'm just like,
I don't know if I got this
yeah.
time.
What's 95 minutes,
Hmm.
so I'll out myself in that regard,
That's
that
totally
I
fine.
owe it to myself to see it for
Hmm.
sure.
Yeah, Steve's great.
It's a great omission. I've kind of been waiting to be asked if I've seen it for like years, and now here we are, and it's on the record. So,
Yeah.
but Ken Burns, to quickly pivot away from my admission, Ken Burns is also very influential. Obviously he has like, his work and the team he works with at Florentine Films just have like an incredibly high degree of like journalistic integrity. And but also, like, I mean, like, my wife was just watching his Civil War documentary, which I've seen several times and love, but I haven't seen it maybe in like 15 or 20 years. And my wife was just watching it a few months ago, and I just like sat down halfway through an episode, and just like the wit, it's just pictures and
Yeah.
music.
Yeah.
And yeah, there's like actors reading, like VO, but the VO is from like letters written by real people. And like, it's just so amazing what you can create in a person's like being or in their mind with something that is, when you actually like break down what the nuts and bolts of it are, it's like it couldn't be more fundamental. It's so
Yeah.
basic. And so I've tried to, especially his documentary The War. That one I actually saw before the Civil War. That might have been the first Ken Burns doc I ever saw, was The War, is World War II one. That was very, I mean, like, I can, and that also speaks to me a lot as like a veteran, because they're interviewing the veterans. Whereas in Civil War, right? Like, obviously, there's no one alive to be interviewed, so it's a very different approach. Even if the result is the same and the nuts and bolts are kind of the same. But I mean, like, anytime I turn on The War, like that, like 5 minute, cold open and pre-titles or whatever, like, I'm always like sobbing,
I
and it's
know.
just like, it's so powerful. And there's real like beauty and artistry and humanity in that, and it's real, and that's what's
Hmm.
so incredible about it. Nothing but, his, like, obviously the documentaries that I've done, if people have watched any of the others, if they watch Alex or Zayrod, is not quite the same as a Ken Burns documentary, in sort of, in that they're a bit more subjective, and that's not his MO at all. And I frankly, like, I'd be a little embarrassed to ever meet him, because I don't know what he thinks about what I've done. But that is that there's like a little, people pleaser inside of me, and I'm sure there is.
Yeah,
Maybe
we're
not so
definitely
little,
different.
like, there is a part of me that's like, oh, yeah, I know, Ken, you don't like subjective filmmaking and documentary, but like, man, I'm gonna do it so good, you might actually like it anyways, like.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I think Errol Morris to me is the counterpoint in that. Like, his films are so subjective, like, incredibly, but then but then he, like, he sort of pioneered not just the Interatron sort of visual of the subject looking at the camera, which he's doesn't even use anymore, by the way. And so that's why I stopped using it. I'm
Hmm.
just copying the greats. But but his questioning, his use of his questions from off camera to sort of like poke and prod, and never quite a record scratch moment, but a moment to, like, authentically, in the course of the authentic interaction of generating an interview with a subject, those moments where he kind of was like, wait a minute, and he kind of, I maybe I'm totally off base, but for me at least, he kind of like pioneered that sort as a valid device. And that's kind of what I referred to earlier when I said that, especially in documentary, though I think this, you could make the argument that it's more broadly true, but especially in documentary, that the making of the documentary really has to be kind of a part of the story of the documentary. That's really what I was referring to, is that idea of acknowledging that there's a process of question and answer going on, and where appropriate, where useful, including letting the audience kind of, not just peek behind the curtain as if there's, a magician hiding behind there, but more so revealing if it's an only, you want to be careful when you do it because you don't want to necessarily like kill a, great moment, but when appropriate, just like letting people get a little bit of a glimpse of the process of what that back and forth was like, that's a part of it. It's not actually an aside. It's actually a critical
Yeah.
part of it, I think.
Yep, absolutely. All right, I could talk to you forever, but
I know.
we're gonna wrap up. So, last question, always on the podcast, is: do you have a yes and story for us?
Yeah, I do, and hopefully a lovely one that ties it all together. In fact, so yeah, obviously, yes, and I learned in taking some improv classes, and it's a wonderful principle I try to apply, professionally, but also personally in my personal life. And the other thing is, I learned from someone I for life me can't remember who, so I'm not going to give proper attribution here, but the like sort of orange theory of symmetry, if I can say that 5 times fast.
Yeah, that's
Like
fast.
if you start a sketch, I don't know if you guys might have a much more elegant term for this, but the way I learned it was like if you start a sketch with an orange, you can go wherever it goes, and as long as you say orange at the end, the audience will applaud and know that it's over. And I literally like apply that to everything I do. Maybe the story is a little bit of an orange story here, which is that, so I told you earlier, I was a combat photojournalist. I mentioned the writing and sort of some of the conditions in which I would like file stories, but actually for me, the most impactful thing of that experience was actually taking photos. And even though I'd grown up like loving movies and wanting to make movies, I was not a photographer. I had like a little like VHS video camera, but you don't have to pull focus on that. So I did have like a little bit of an eye at the time that I joined the military, but that was really like my writing really struggled within the confines of like, you have to adhere to AP style in within the Department of Defense sort of framework of being a journalist. But it's like very rigidly the AP style, they don't have their own style, but you better like, if that comma's misplaced, like, you're getting in trouble. Whereas photography was very different. Like you could, there were certain tenets of like sort of documentation you had to adhere to, but you didn't necessarily have to, there wasn't like a specific style of photography you had to use. So during the course of my tour, and probably very similar to just like the number of reps we were talking about with your performers, that you get on a show that you put on, or the Packers photographer, like just the sheer volume of reps you get. Like, I must have taken, like 200 or 300 photos a day. Yeah, a lot of them are like on, continuous shutter, but like you're constantly like adjusting even when that shutter is going. So I'll count them, for whatever, 360 something days, as long as exactly a year I was in country. So, whatever that math comes out to, that's how many photos I took after. I was a very good photographer when I left Iraq, is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Since getting to this level of documentary, I've become very detached from the camera. I have a very specific style that I like, and that usually is actually quite versatile project to project. And I love to collaborate with the cinematographer, but I also really like to trust the cinematographer that I hire, and I'm not afraid of giving notes or direction, but like I do try to like let the visuals sort of arise organically from the collaboration. That's just my philosophy. On Alex versus Arod, I hired one cinematographer, and just these projects go on so long, and you're up and you're down. You're not shooting every day. You might not shoot every month, so people get booked. And I started out with Lucas Gaff, who's like a brilliant DP I've worked with several times. He shot like rap shit for HBO, so he's unscripted stuff that people might be familiar with. He's just got an incredible eye, but he got booked up, as great cinematographers do. You're happy for him, but it's also like, God, man, come on. I just want a consistent visual style here, and it's your style. And then Bryant Robinson came in, and he's also a great, very different sensibility, So for him, unfortunately, he's like having to fill these shoes of a different person, but also bring his own sensibility to it. And so there's maybe a little bit of a yes and there, but what I'm actually getting to is, so if you've seen the documentary, there's a spoiler alert here. In episode 3, it takes a pretty substantial stylistic departure from just being Alex sitting in a chair. And this was deliberately designed. This didn't happen by accident. we took him back to Colorado, and he was willing, give him all the credit in the world. And frankly, it might have even been his idea, but he was certainly willing to go back to where he did all this psychotherapy for years with this doctor, Dr. David Schnarch, to the house, who's since passed away, to his old house, and filmed all of the material, or as much of the material as we could, in that house, in the room where he did therapy with this guy. Because I felt like, that I just felt like therapy is so much more than two people talking in a chair. So if I'm having a guy sitting in a chair talking about sitting in a chair, like it's just too many layers removed, too much abstraction from the thing. And so it was we were at least gonna go back there and like film around the area, see what came up, get him sort of out of his head, out of the chair. And about 2 days before we were going to do this shoot, a blizzard came through and dropped like 4 feet of snow. And this guy doesn't live in Denver. He lives way up in the Rockies, like, I mean, way up there. And so we didn't even know if we were going to be able to go in, and drive in there. We had to hire a snowplow. Credit to our producer, Francesca, and Lindsay also helped her, I think, finding a way to hire a snowplow. But both of my cinematographers said they couldn't do it. And I was like, this is the most important shoot of the project. We have to do this. We have to do like this, everything's been building to this. If we mess this up, like, then what have we been doing? This is the thing that I wanted to do. This is the reason I did the project, was this shoot, and this material shot in this way. And I brought in a third cinematographer, and his name is Chris LaMarca, and he actually was just nominated for an Oscar for a movie that he shot called, I always get this wrong, Sugar Cane. I always say Sugarland. It's Sugar Cane. It's very heavy. It's about Canadian Native Americans and sort of the re-education camps that they went through. It's a beautiful film, but it can be hard to like press play on because it's going to be heavy. Yeah. This was before he had been nominated for an Oscar for it. And he's just like looking at all my material, and I'm talking him through things and showing him stuff. And he's in my office, and he looks at me and he goes, dude, you got to do it. And I was just like, what do you mean? No, dude, like I got to focus on Arod. And like, I got like, look at this list of like talking points, and I got to like fit the snow plow, and there's going to 4 feet of snow. And it's, we have like, it's an 18-hour day. Like, I don't, like, I mean, I know I can shoot and I have opinions, but like, you're talking like the level of camera I need to be using to be consistent with what we've been doing. Like, I don't, and he was like, no, you got to do it. Wow. And I just thought about it. I mean, honestly, he said it. He did say it twice, but the first time he said it, I was like, "Yeah, I'm gonna have to do it." And so that is the yes and that I have been building to all of the storytelling. I know that was very circuitous, but I just said, "Okay, amazing. I'm gonna do it myself," and I did, and I'm glad I did. And honestly, that is, just for me personally, I'm most proud of that in the project. It's not the best shot material in the documentary, but that doesn't matter because I know I did it, and not just that I did it, but that like. I am a very like tactile person. That's why I like documentaries that are real. Like I said, even if I do scripted stuff, I don't like CGI. Like how, I made a stupid little pumpkin short film a long time ago that went viral, and we used real pumpkins. We didn't do CGI. Like I like real things, even when it's for something that's make believe, but especially for documentary. And so it was just it just felt like the reason I did it was this therapeutic journey Alex shared with us. That's the whole reason I like spent 3 years working on this project, was I wanted a chance to try and take him and viewers to the point at which this person has gone on this whole journey, and it all comes down to them sitting in a cold room in the mountains, and the movie god smiled on us and dumped 4 feet of snow, and they smiled on us again and gave us a snow plow, and then they said, you got to do it. And I said, yes, Aunt. So
I love it.
There you go.
It's the best way to end this conversation. Alex versus Arod is the latest on HBO. Erik LeDrew, thank you so much for coming on the pod.
Thank you so much. I hope people enjoy it.